Your Chihuahua may have tried to tell you something today, and chances are you missed it. Not because you don't love them, not because you weren't paying attention, but because dogs speak a language most humans never learn to hear. Perhaps it happened this morning. Perhaps while you were drinking coffee, reading a book, or simply sitting in your favorite chair. Your Chihuahua walked over, looked up at you, moved a little closer, and gently licked your hand. Just once. Maybe twice. You smiled. You called it a kiss. And life moved on. But what if that tiny moment meant far more than you realized? Right now, somewhere in the world, another Chihuahua is doing exactly the same thing. Curled beside the person they trust most, watching them quietly, waiting patiently, not asking for food, not asking for a toy, not asking for a walk, just wanting to be close. To humans, a lick lasts only a second. To a Chihuahua, it can be part of a conversation that never uses words. Because dogs do not explain their feelings the way people do. They don't sit down and tell us they're worried. They don't tell us they feel safe. They don't tell us they love us. Instead, they communicate through tiny rituals. A soft glance across the room. A warm body pressed against your leg. A paw resting gently on your arm. A sigh as they settle beside you. And sometimes, a lick. What makes this especially important for Chihuahuas is their history. Unlike many breeds that were developed to work far away from people, Chihuahuas were shaped through generations to stay close to human beings. Very close. Close enough to hear your voice. Close enough to feel your presence. Close enough to know they are not alone. That history still lives inside them today. Behind those large eyes that seem to follow your every movement. Behind those tiny footsteps that trail behind you from room to room. Behind the way they wait outside the bathroom door. Behind the way they watch you leave and celebrate when you come home. Behavioral research suggests that many licking behaviors serve purposes far beyond simple affection. Sometimes dogs lick to communicate, sometimes to gather information, sometimes to seek reassurance, and sometimes to strengthen a social bond they deeply value. Think about your own Chihuahua for a moment. Do they follow you into the kitchen? Wait outside the bathroom door? Watch you while you move around the house? Do they seem calmer when they know exactly where you are? If so, the licking may be connected to something much bigger than a simple habit. Because beneath every lick may be a silent question. Not spoken with words. Not spoken with sound. But spoken through trust. A question that sounds something like this. Are you still here? Are we still okay? Are we still connected? For a Chihuahua, that connection can mean everything. Safety, comfort, security, and peace. Which brings us to something remarkable. Something happening deep inside both your brain and your Chihuahua's brain. A biological system that helps create trust between dogs and humans. A system so powerful that scientists often call it the love hormone. And once you understand it, you may never look at your Chihuahuas licking the same way again. If your Chihuahua follows you everywhere like a tiny shadow, comment one below, because the next discovery may explain why being close to you feels so important to them. Imagine your Chihuahua asleep beside you, not on the other side of the room, not across the house, but close enough to feel your presence. Maybe their tiny body is pressed gently against your leg. Maybe their head is resting on your foot. Maybe they aren't even sleeping deeply, just dozing, listening, making sure you're still there. To many people, this looks like dependence. But behavioral researchers see something different. They see attachment, one of the strongest emotional forces in the animal world. According to behavioral research, positive interactions between dogs and humans can trigger the release of oxytocin, a remarkable chemical often called the love hormone. What's fascinating is that this doesn't happen only in dogs. It happens in humans too. When a dog and a person share a positive moment, a gentle touch, a calm interaction, or a moment of affection, both brains may begin producing the same bonding chemistry. The chemistry of trust, the chemistry of connection, the chemistry that quietly says, "You belong with me." Now, think about your Chihuahua again. The way they watch you when you're reading, the way they settle down when they hear your voice, the way they seem calmer when you're nearby. Those moments are not random. They are part of a relationship your Chihuahua experiences every single day. And this is where licking becomes especially meaningful. Many owners assume their Chihuahua licks because they want attention. Sometimes that's true. But often, something deeper may be happening. A Chihuahua doesn't understand retirement. They don't understand appointments. They don't understand where you go when you leave the house. But they understand how it feels when you're near. Safe, predictable, comforting. And because that feeling matters so much, your Chihuahua naturally seeks ways to strengthen it. A nudge with the nose, a body leaning against your leg, a paw resting on your arm, and sometimes a gentle lick. Not because they're demanding something, not because they're trying to annoy you, and certainly not because they're trying to control you. Instead, they may be participating in one of the oldest bonding rituals they know. A tiny act that helps them feel connected to the person they trust most in the world. In many ways, your Chihuahua's licking may be less about what they want from you and more about how they feel about you. Because love in the canine world is rarely dramatic. It doesn't arrive with speeches, or grand gestures, or declarations. It arrives quietly, repeatedly. In small moments, most people overlook. A glance, a sigh, a warm body curled beside yours, a tiny tongue reaching out to touch your hand. And yet, there is another reason Chihuahuas seem especially driven to maintain this connection. A reason rooted not only in chemistry, but in the very way this breed was shaped throughout history. Because in some surprisingly important ways, your Chihuahua never completely stopped being a puppy. That powerful bond doesn't begin with adulthood. In many ways, it begins in puppyhood. Imagine a Chihuahua puppy only a few weeks old. small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. Its eyes are still learning about the world. Its legs are still uncertain. Its confidence barely exists. The world is enormous. Every sound feels louder. Every shadow feels larger. Every unfamiliar experience carries a little uncertainty. And whenever that puppy feels unsure, it does the same thing. It looks for safety. It moves closer to its mother, closer to warmth, closer to protection. That instinct is one of the oldest survival systems in the animal kingdom. Stay close to the one who keeps you safe. Behaviorists use a term called neoteny. Simply put, it means that some youthful traits remain long after puppyhood ends. And Chihuahuas are often considered one of the breeds that carry many of these puppy-like social behaviors into adulthood. Not because they are weak, not because they are spoiled, and certainly not because they are trying to manipulate anyone. In fact, modern canine behavioral science has largely moved away from old dominance theories that once tried to explain every behavior through power and control. Most attachment behaviors are not about dominance at all. They are about security. That changes the way we see a Chihuahua. The dog following you into the kitchen is not trying to supervise you. The dog waiting outside the bathroom door is not trying to control you. And the dog licking your hand every evening is not trying to be the boss. Instead, they may be responding to a much older emotional instinct. The instinct to remain close to the individual who makes the world feel safe. For many Chihuahuas, that individual is you. Think about that for a moment. Out of every person they have ever seen, every voice they have ever heard, every face they have ever known, you became their safe place. You became the voice that calms them when something startles them. The presence that helps them relax. The familiar scent that tells them everything is okay. And that may explain why licking can feel so emotionally important to them. Because sometimes a Chihuahua isn't simply licking a hand, or an arm, or a face. Sometimes they may be reconnecting with the person who makes them feel protected. The person their nervous system trusts most. The person they turn to when the world feels uncertain. In a strange way, the behavior isn't as different from that tiny puppy as it first appears. The need is still the same. The feeling is still the same. Only the safe place has changed. The puppy once searched for its mother. Now your Chihuahua searches for you. And that may be one of the most touching truths behind their licking. Because beneath the behavior may be a simple message. Not a demand. Not a habit. Not even a request. Just a quiet reminder. You make me feel safe. But there is another reason many Chihuahuas keep licking long after that bond has already been formed. And surprisingly, that reason may have a lot to do with us. That reason may have more to do with us than we realize. Because sometimes your Chihuahua keeps licking not only because it feels meaningful to them, but because it works. Think back to the last time your Chihuahua licked your hand. What happened next? Perhaps you smiled. Perhaps you laughed. Perhaps you reached down and stroked their head. Maybe you spoke to them in that special voice reserved only for them. Good dog. Sweet girl. There you are. To you, it was simply a loving moment. To your Chihuahua, it may have been something else as well. A successful strategy. Behavioral science calls this reinforcement. When a behavior leads to a positive outcome, the brain becomes more likely to repeat it in the future. The principle is remarkably simple. Behavior that works tends to continue. Your Chihuahua licks your hand. You smile. They receive attention. Their brain records the result. Connection achieved. Mission accomplished. Over time, many dogs learn that licking is one of the fastest ways to create interaction with the person they love most. Not because they are manipulating you. That word gives dogs far too much calculation. Instead, they are learning in the same way all animals learn. Action. Result. Repeat. And honestly, can you blame them? Imagine discovering a tiny behavior that almost always earns a smile from your favorite person. A behavior that brings warmth, attention, affection, and closeness. Most of us would repeat it too. This is why some Chihuahuas become enthusiastic lickers. The behavior begins with attachment, then gets strengthened through experience. A little love, little learning, a little repetition. And before long, licking becomes part of the relationship itself. A familiar ritual shared between dog and human. Yet even this explanation doesn't tell the whole story. Because sometimes your Chihuahua licks you when you haven't spoken, when you haven't touched them, when you haven't encouraged anything at all. Sometimes they walk over quietly, look at your face, and begin licking your hand at the exact moment you're feeling sad. And that raises an extraordinary question. What if your Chihuahua notices more about your emotions than you think? What if those little eyes have been reading you all along? What if those little eyes have been reading you all along? Most people assume communication flows in only one direction. We watch our dogs. We study their behavior. We try to understand what they're feeling. But rarely do we stop to ask a different question. How much does our dog understand about us? The answer may be more than most people imagine. Behavioral research suggests that dogs are remarkably skilled at observing human social cues. They notice changes in body language, changes in tone of voice, changes in routine, even subtle shifts in emotional energy. And few breeds spend as much time studying their humans as Chihuahuas. After all, they are almost always nearby. Watching, listening, learning. They see the difference between your relaxed walk and your worried walk. They hear the difference between your cheerful voice and your tired voice. They notice when your daily habits suddenly change. Long before you say a word. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself. A difficult day arrives. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone else would notice. Just one of those quiet days when your heart feels a little heavier than usual. You sit down in your chair. You stare out the window. You don't call your Chihuahua. You don't ask for comfort. Yet somehow, they appear. They jump beside you, or curl up at your feet, or gently place a paw on your leg. And sometimes, they begin to lick your hand. Coincidence? Maybe. But many owners have noticed moments like these throughout the years. Moments that make them wonder if their dog somehow knew. The truth is, your Chihuahua doesn't need to understand every detail of your life. They don't know what bills are. They don't know what retirement means. They don't know why you're worried about tomorrow. But they can often sense that something feels different. And when something feels different, many Chihuahuas do what they have always done. They move closer, not farther away. That is one of the most beautiful parts of their nature. When humans become overwhelmed, we often withdraw. We become quiet, distracted, lost in our thoughts. But many Chihuahuas respond in the opposite way. They close the distance. They seek contact. They check in. Almost as if they're asking, "Are you okay?" And perhaps that's why their licking can feel so meaningful. Not because they fully understand the problem, but because they understand the person. The voice they know, the scent they trust, the human who has become the center of their world. For a Chihuahua, staying emotionally connected may be just as important as staying physically close. Which brings us to one final reason some Chihuahuas lick more intensely than others. A reason that appears most clearly during the moments they fear losing that connection. The moments when you pick up your keys, walk toward the door, and prepare to leave them behind. The moments when you pick up your keys, walk toward the door, and prepare to leave them behind. For most people, it is a routine part of the day. Nothing unusual, nothing emotional, just another errand, another appointment, another place to be. But for a Chihuahua, those small actions can mean something very different. Because long before you open the door, they often know what's coming. The keys, the shoes, the jacket, the familiar sequence repeated hundreds of times before. Dogs are masters of routine. They notice patterns most humans never think about. And over time, many Chihuahuas learn exactly what those patterns mean. You're leaving. For some dogs, that realization brings only mild disappointment. For others, especially deeply attached companion breeds, it can create genuine emotional discomfort. Not because they are dramatic, not because they are spoiled, but because the person who helps them feel safe is about to disappear from view. This is where licking can take on another meaning. Behavioral experts often describe licking as a pacifying behavior in certain situations. A behavior that may help a dog calm itself when emotions begin to rise. In other words, sometimes licking isn't only about connecting with you. Sometimes it's also about comforting themselves. Think about the Chihuahua who suddenly becomes extra affectionate as their owner prepares to leave. The dog who follows more closely than usual. The dog who repeatedly licks a hand. The dog who seems unable to stop checking in. From the outside, it may look like attention-seeking. But beneath the surface, another story may be unfolding. A story that sounds something like this. I know what happens next. You're going somewhere. And I'm not coming with you. For a 5-pound dog living in a world built for creatures much larger than itself, that feeling can be significant. Especially when the human leaving is the center of its emotional universe. This doesn't mean every Chihuahua who licks before you leave is anxious. Far from it. Most are simply expressing attachment in healthy ways. But it does remind us of something important. Many behaviors we casually label as clingy or needy may actually be rooted in trust. Trust that you will come back. Trust that the bond will remain intact. Trust that their safe place has not disappeared forever. And perhaps that is why so many Chihuahua owners feel emotional when they finally understand what the licking might mean. Because suddenly, the behavior no longer looks annoying. It no longer looks excessive. It no longer looks like a bad habit. Instead, it begins to look like loyalty. A small dog trying to stay connected to the person who matters most. A tiny act carrying a very large feeling. And when you step back and look at everything we've explored, the biology, the attachment, the puppy instincts that never completely disappeared, the learning, the emotional awareness, a different picture begins to emerge. Your Chihuahua isn't licking you simply because they like the taste of your skin. And they aren't doing it because they're trying to dominate you. In fact, modern canine behavioral science has largely rejected the old dominance myths that once explained every relationship through status and control. What we're often seeing instead is something far more touching. A dog using one of the oldest communication tools it has to strengthen a bond that means everything to them. Maybe that's why so many Chihuahua owners eventually discover the same truth. The little lick they once ignored was never just a lick at all. It was trust. It was comfort. It was connection. And sometimes it was love. So the next time your Chihuahua gently licks your hand, pause for a moment. Look into those eyes. And remember, you may be receiving one of the most sincere messages they know how to send. If your Chihuahua has ever licked you at exactly the moment you needed comfort most, comment 1 below. We'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoyed discovering the hidden emotional world of Chihuahuas, don't forget to subscribe for more insights into the behaviors most owners misunderstand. Because sometimes the smallest dogs carry the biggest feelings of all.